The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Hebert, Director of Communications here at Saney's, and welcome to another Lunch and Learn in our ongoing Financial Friday series. Saney's is excited to offer these sessions in cooperation with our corporate partner, AXA. AXA has a long-standing presence in New York, and a large portion of AXA's New York client base is built upon the work they do within the public education system. Through AXA, Saney's members can receive competitive insurance rates and a full array of retirement services, including a complimentary financial profile for Saney's members, which we urge you to take advantage of. It's a really great benefit for members. Our AXA presenter today is Kelly DeMay, a Regional Vice President and Advisor from the Rochester area. Now, before we get started, please note that all participants are muted during the session, but we will save time at the end for Q&A. So as we go along, if you have questions, just type those into the panel, your questions panel, which is probably on the right of your screen, and we'll get to those following the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Michelle. Today I'm going to be talking about financial strategy specifically for women. And this is a really, really interesting and hot topic right now going on in the financial industry. So for those of you who don't know, interestingly enough, actually the largest wealth transfer in history is going to occur over the course of the next, roughly at this point in time, 18 years is what the projection is talking about. And that wealth transfer is going to be to women. So literally we can project out that women are going to be already, and even more so, dominant than they have been in the past. And the reason why that wealth transfer is going to happen is that in that population of baby boomers, basically one of two things may come up with their situation. One is that folks are married, and statistically men pass away before women. So when men pass away and leave their surviving spouse their estate, women statistically are going to be inheriting that estate, of course. The second thing is that the population of baby boomers is also the one of the largest groups of people that are getting separated and divorced nowadays, just with, once the kids are out of the house and things start to change related to, what life looks like, that's a group of people who are getting divorced, and then women are once again getting half of the money. So the reason I'm saying this and the reason it's relevant is simply for the fact of, there's a lot surrounding, being a woman and everything that a woman has on their plate. And going along with that, obviously the financial component is going to be, has been, continues to be, and will continue to be a huge, huge part of that. Statistically, interestingly enough, women want to work with women, financial advisors, attorneys, and CPAs over 90% of the time. So also kind of interesting that statistically women want to work with other women. And, the specifics of that are a little bit to be debated as to the why, but the reality is that is a very, very real thing that everybody's handling and working with at this point in time. Going along with that, what I'm going to go through today is talk about 10 common financial misunderstandings amongst basically three categories of time frames of life. Women just starting out, mid-career women, and then women approaching retirement and already getting, or who are already retired. Going along with women starting out, one of the biggest, most common things I hear people say is, I'm still young, I can wait a few years before I start saving. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I find about this is that, it's always the concept of time, right? Like, I still have time, I still have a lot of time, we can take care of this at some point in time, down the road. And the reality is that what does time cost you? What is the time value of money even? And if you look at the example that's on the screen currently, you can see that if you start saving early, so in this example, the first example, if someone starts saving at age 25, they need to save $189 a month to have $500,000 at the time they go to retire. Conversely, if somebody waits until age 40 to retire, they need to save $614 a month because now time is not on their side. So the cost of waiting is pretty significant. And as you can see, and I'm sure as everyone is well aware, the reality is that starting young and even starting with a small amount, it really, really adds up over time. The other thing that I find with folks who are younger, just starting saving, that once they get it going and they get it started and they start to see their money working for them, they're a lot more likely to increase. They're a lot more likely to pay attention to it and become engaged related to their finances, because all of a sudden this thing that was just, something I was putting a little bit of money to kind of builds, and because wow, I all of a sudden have a good chunk of money in this, So it forces in a positive way an engagement that if it's out of sight, sometimes it's out of mind for folks who just aren't saving. Second myth is I'm young and I contribute to a 403B plan and basically I'm all set. I'm good. I'm doing the basics. I've got a pension, I'm saving into retirement, and I'm good to go. All the time I hear this from younger folks and even sometimes older folks, quite frankly. And always my connection is with school employees is, imagine if you were a teacher and a teacher said, you know what, I've got my curriculum set to go for life. I'm doing all the things I need to. I'm meeting my state standards. There's no need to make any changes. Certainly I would think that, one of the interesting components is it should always be evolving. Things are always changing. The students that we work with are always changing. So the curriculum, maybe you don't need to throw it out the window every year, but it should be an evolution that's natural about it that occurs. And so many people, it's just I'm good. It's good, and I think a lot of that spurs from, it's not always exciting or fun to talk about. Ironically enough, last night I was just meeting with clients of mine. She is a school employee, the wife is a school employee, and the husband works in a hospital. And the wife really, really has a hard time coming in. We have a good relationship with her, worked with her for years, but she just says, I know my space really well and I feel comfortable in my space. And every time we have to come here, we talk about things that I don't always love to talk about, and it's always a priority to make people feel at ease. But, at some point in time, you can't kick the can down the road, but there should always constantly be, a review and overview. And that's why, if you fail to plan, essentially you plan to fail. And just, using hope as a strategy for, I've got a 403B and I've got a pension, and I hope that'll be enough. I'll be good. Somebody told me that'll be good. Is it though? How do you know? And maybe it is good for the time being. It's not always a constantly changing, but it is always constantly something you need to be paying attention to. Myth number 3 is I'm not a risk taker, so I shouldn't invest in stocks. Hugely common. So one thing that I find with school employees is just by the nature of who school employees are, they are not risk takers with their money. And there's nothing wrong with not being a risk taker with your money. But you have to understand the compromise to not taking on risk or being willing to take on risk is the fact of you're going to have to save more money if you're more conservative with your risk tolerance. What I mean by that is let's say somebody is highly, highly conservative with their retirement savings, and maybe we're only looking to generate a 3 to 4% rate of return based on how, what their appetite for risk is. Nothing wrong with that, but that money just isn't going to work as hard for them as a person who maybe is a little more risky, who's going to get a 7 to 8% rate of return. So the cost of that choice is you're going to have to save a lot more money. Honestly, it's interesting working with school employees when the New York State pension is as competitive as it is, because actually school employees, they're the ones who really can afford, ironically enough, to take on the risk. Like if you look at somebody who just has a 401k in retirement, they worked at a corporation and they have no pension, if that 401k, it's going to fluctuate because it's invested. If that loses money, you might have to spend less money. You might have to change your lifestyle a little bit. Conversely, folks who have a New York State pension are going to get the same pension every month for the rest of their life. You know, the stock market's going to go up and down, and the economy's going to fluctuate. But the reality is that check is going to be the exact same every month. So because of that, statistically, school employees can afford to be a little bit riskier, but a lot of times they're just not huge risk takers. And the cost of not being a risk taker, you know, this is a graph that's a little bit involved, but you can see that if you're investing in treasury bills, which is the screen line, which is as slow and steady, it's as slow as it goes, you know, it's not going to be that exciting. You're never going to lose that much money, but you're also never going to make that much money. Whereas you can see all of the other lines have this, you know, fluctuation of volatility would occur, but the goal is this uptrend over time, right? So it's really, really looking at the long term of this whole thing. Especially in this category of younger employees and younger people, you know, honestly, school employees can afford to be, you know, on the riskier side of things for a while, because if you think about it, somebody might say, I'm going to retire at 55. And my reaction or my next question is, you might retire at 55, but when are you looking to use this money? And a lot of times people say, well, not at least until 65 or 70. So even though you might feel like you're only going to retire in a couple of years, the time horizon you have is actually a lot greater than that. The next myth is investing is too complicated and too time consuming and just not something I want to get into. Once again, huge topic of conversation that comes up. And I always tell the people that I meet with, you got to look at investing in that conversation just like you look at a student who's learning, right? How does a student learn to add? You know, a first or second grader just doesn't wake up one day and it's like, oh, 1 + 1 = 2. There we go. It's all right there. No, it's initially, at least, it's this stick or this line, and then this cross, and then a line, and then these side lines gives you a squiggle. And then as learning occurs and development occurs, you know, that's a 1 and another 1. And if I have 2 of those, I get 2 of something. And then it's 1 + 1 = 2. I know that's a very basic example, but all learning occurs the same way. In the concept of being an investor, learning occurs in the sense that you're not going to just, you know, open up and understand everything day one. It's a progression, and you start small and you start basic, but then it should develop and grow and progress from there accordingly, and it will. But you've got to at least have the initial conversation, and then once you get into it, once again, just like any learning, and you kind of get more exposed to it, it's like, okay, I am familiar with that. That does sound familiar. I've heard of this before. And it usually takes, I find, about 3 times before people say, yes, Kelly, I'm good on this. I remember talking about this before. So just remember that sometimes it's that initial conversation that it's the most scary, but the reality is that you just got to trust the process and trust the person you're hopefully learning from. One of the things that I run into a lot is that people say, you know, I'm an intelligent person. I don't like it when folks talk over my head. And sometimes I meet with somebody and I just don't know what they're saying. And, you know, if that's the case, sometimes you need to tell people to pump the brakes, or sometimes you need to look at somebody who maybe can convey things in a way that is a little bit more relatable. Going to the next category, so the mid-career women with family responsibility. So interestingly enough, each one of these phases has its own extreme challenges and extreme rewards to it. That's just kind of a function of life. But going and being a mid-career woman, and you're kind of halfway through this journey. You know, women can save as much for retirement as men. You know, going along with that myth, women on average earn only 78 cents for every dollar a man earns. Also, women statistically live longer than men, and they tend to be more conservative investors. So all these factors combined, you know, where it's easy to say, you know, I read a general statistic and I'm going to be good, or I used an online retirement calculator and it said I'm fine. You've got to understand the true picture is so much bigger than that, not only from the financial component, but the emotional as well. Is somebody coaching you through what's going on? One of the things that I run into for folks in this space is that they're at the point where it's just like life, you know, and there's so much on their plate. And as women, so much falls on our plates, you know. And it's always I guess, a little bit in some ways interesting, you know, because I don't, you know, no one else really understands other than the way a woman understands. But it's especially in this space, you know, where you have to at least make this a priority, you know, to a certain extent, because you still have to take care of yourself even when you're taking care of everyone else. Myth number 6. So this is an interesting one. I can easily pay for my children's college expenses because I've got a 529 plan. So 529 is just the tax code for college savings plan in every state. And so funny enough, yesterday I was meeting with a school administrator, a male school administrator, and I said to him, I said, John, are saving for your children's college education, is that something that's a priority to you? And he said, Kelly, I paid for my own college education. My kids, you know, they'll figure it out. We will figure it out. But yeah, it's not a priority for me to, you know, pay for my kids' college education. I said, okay, you know, certainly understand that. I said, John, if your wife was here, would she have the same answer? And he looked at me and he said, no, and I probably wouldn't either if she was here. So it was very interesting, but also a real tell, you know. Obviously, you know, I think for most people, helping their kids with college to the means they're able is really, really a priority. And I think that everyone's well aware, college is pretty expensive. And nowadays, there's actually a lot of different ways to save for college. 529 plans are one option. I'm not going to tell you that I'm the biggest proponent of 529 plans. I think there's pros and cons to everything. But that being said, it's a fit for some people, but it's not an end-all be-all fit for everyone. You know, and I certainly probably don't need to tell all of you on the line that college is expensive. Interestingly enough, since 1987, the inflation rate on college tuition is interestingly and a little bit scarily consistently 6% per year. So in 1987, if you projected out the cost of Harvard of what it would be in 2007, it was exactly almost to the dollar a 6% per year annualized inflation rate every year out. So it's really, really interesting how much more it goes up than, you know, I'm pretty sure, like, salaries don't go up 6% per year. You know what I mean? Like, you think about the significance of those numbers, and not very much grows at that rate of return. Myth number 7, someone else takes care of my finances so I don't have to worry. So I'm going to tell, an interesting story with this one. When it comes to, when I meet with younger folks and folks in this middle category, this is typically a response. You know, my dad always did that for me. My spouse does that for me. I do other things. That's the balance in our relationships. This is someone else's job. And interestingly enough, I find that when like I said, when I meet with the younger category of people and they tell, like, oh, you know, my spouse is great at this. They do it all. They take care of it. They know everything about this. And then what I've found over time is that as that group of people, what I'll define as grows up, matures, gets older, life happens. By the time women specifically get to their mid to later 30s, they get to the point where, you know, and I'll say to them, I know your spouse is always taking care of this. And they'll stop me and they'll say, you know, Kelly, I've always told you that. And I always believed that, because I always believed that my spouse was the smartest person I've ever met in my entire life about everything. And now that we've been married a while and I kind of know a little bit more than I know now, I think I had better take a little bit more control of this. So it's kind of a funny thing in a way for me, just to hear that this whole passing the buck thing, it happens for a long time, but what's the cost of waiting? At 40, your spouse took care of everything, and now, you've got to pick your head up and look around. There was a lot of time that was given up, to not have some awareness and control over your financial situation. And I'm going to come down to the fact that it just comes to a basic education and understanding it's not up to one spouse or another. It's about your financial household health and whoever is in that household. And that's always a team conversation, first, last, and always. Myth number 8, I should get half of the assets if I should get a divorce. So divorces are always interesting, and certainly, 50% of the population goes through them. And I can't say enough, and I'm sure that some people can relate to this in a number of ways. There's the financial component of going through a divorce, but more so there's also the emotional component. And a lot of it is going through such a challenging time of life. And, are you able to see things from different perspectives and think as clearly as humanly possible about what the decisions you're making are? So, going through that and getting some help and getting support related to the divorce it's critically important. There's going to be a new lifestyle. There's going to be a new budget. There's going to be a new emotional connection to money and life that was probably completely different than what it was prior, and it's interesting to have people go through this. And, for some people, it's so much to go through that sometimes people are like, I just can't even talk about it. But then when they're ready, so there's got to be that time as well. But certainly it's just not as simple as it's going to be okay because I'll get half of what's ever out there. Unfortunately, I've seen people make quick and bad decisions. Women make quick and poor decisions in the meantime, just because it's like, I've got a career, I've got to take care of my kids, and we're going through this heavy situation right now. It's a lot on everybody. Myth number 9, I have life and disability insurance through my job, so I don't need to protect my family's future. You do. So every school employee in the state of New York does have some life insurance and disability insurance through New York State. And I use the term some very, very loosely because it is, quite frankly, the way that it works out isn't all that much at the end of the day. The way that the New York State pension works is that if someone were to pass away while in service, their beneficiary would get 3 times their current salary. So a lot of times I'll see people and they're like, Kelly, I make $100,000 a year. That's $300,000. We're fine. It's good. And I say, pump the brakes on that one a second. Is it $300,000 though? Because the way that benefit pays out is the first $50,000 of the $300,000 pays out in a lump sum tax-free death benefit to the beneficiary. Anything above that amount though is a taxable event, or you have to put it into a retirement account for down the road. Because essentially what New York State is saying is they're saying, if somebody passes away while in service, their beneficiary, there's no pension. No pension is going to pay out. So we'll give you a little bit of life insurance and we're going to have you save a little bit for down the road. And, if you think about 50,000, money goes quick. And yes, I've heard plenty of people say, mostly men, quite frankly, oh, we can sell the house. I'll just sell the house. So let me get this straight. Your kids have one home, their home, and their neighborhood. And somebody just passed away, and the first thing you're going to do is put your house on the market. It's just not realistic. So to be honest with you, good planning in this space is really, really important because unfortunately, sometimes bad things happen to good people and it takes a proactive approach with support. But once again, let's be honest, a lot of these conversations should start with the women. That's where the risk is and that's where the drive needs to be. Related to the last category of folks, that's the women approaching retirement or who are already retired. You know, my estate isn't big enough to do estate planning. You know, maybe someone says, I've got a pension, I will have some Social Security, you know, I've got that 403B, and I'm good. Well, what does good look like? You know, do you have children? Are they married? Have they been divorced? Does somebody else prior kid? You know, there's a lot of moving parts to this one. And the reality is that there's a lot of different financial strategies that are actually really, really attractive right now, given our current tax environment, that people can use just to make their dollar work more efficiently for them and their beneficiaries down the road. And it's just a function of having the conversation and being prepared to have the conversation. So, you know, I'm not going through this to make it seem cumbersome or overwhelming, but the reality is that, to be honest, I get these objections every day. I don't need to save. My estate is plenty big. Somebody else takes care of it for me. But the reality is, honestly, just like most other things in life, if you don't take care of it yourself, you know, you may not be really taking care of it at all. And sometimes things are fine and there's not a problem, but it doesn't hurt ever to get a second opinion and determine, like, are things really good? Very recently, I met with a school employee and the spouse. School employee is a school administrator and has a very good job and a very good income. Spouse is a corporate executive and has a very, very good income. For years, they've been clients, and I've said to them, you know, are we ready to do some planning? Because, you know, they have their 403Bs and they had some other things, and no, you know, we're good, you know, we're all set. And then finally, it's, you know, what is the relevance of this? We need to have a plan, you know. So when that happens, it happens at different times for everybody where it becomes more priority, but it is important to understand how to get started on that and understand that the sooner you plan and the sooner you get a game plan, the better off you're going to be. And the reality is if you don't feel like you have a plan now, there's help out there, either from, you know, someone you currently work with. And honestly, if you work with a financial advisor or have your 403B with somebody and you don't like them, you should not work with them. I am flabbergasted on literally a weekly basis when people say, you know, I've had my money with so-and-so for 20 years and I just can't stand them. I hate meeting with them. They always talk, and it's like, you shouldn't be working with them probably then. There's lots of options and lots of help out there, but you got to get it on your radar to get some support. Get somebody to listen to you in a little bit of a different way. And getting started is not hard. You just need to collect some information, do some planning, and then get some guidance and get some support. So one thing that I would encourage all of you to do, if you haven't already, is just make sure that you are looking at the big picture no matter where you are in your life, because things are constantly changing and they're constantly going to be changing, and you'd much rather take a proactive approach with this conversation than not. Any questions?
Any questions, anyone? I don't see anything typed in the panel at this time. Okay. Well, Kelly is available for follow-up questions. And what we'll do is this session has been recorded, so I'll email a recording of the session to all registrants, and we'll include Kelly's information in that email. Then, of course, you can find a list of all your AXA representatives at saneys.org under the resources area also. So if you have any follow-up questions. I think that's it for today, Kelly.
All right. Thanks so much, Michelle. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.